On Sunday, September the 9th, 2018, Sweden, in Northern Europe and Scandinavia will hold its national parliamentary elections. 349 members will be elected to the Swedish parliament, the Riksdag, and according to the opinion polls, there is a large chance that the right-wing populist Eurosceptic, strongly anti-Muslim, largely anti-immigrant, and even allegedly far-right Sweden Democrats will do very well. According to the most recent opinion polls, the ones conducted between August the 16th and August the 31st, the Sweden Democrats' support ranges from about 17.6% to 24%. The main ruling party, the Social Democrats, who have been in power in Sweden most of the time since 1932, normally alone, in an informal confidence and budget agreement with the Communists, now the Left Party, and then lately the Green Party, but since 2014 in coalition with the Green Party or Environmental Party, the Greens. They would receive only, according to these same opinion polls, between 22.1 and 26.3% of the vote. The main center-right or non-socialist party, the Moderate Coalition Party, has significantly lost support. It would receive, according to these same opinion polls, only between 16.2 and 19.5% of the vote. The Environmental Party Greens, in coalition with the Social Democrats for almost 4 years now, would receive between 4.4 and 6.2% of the vote. The originally agrarian Center Party would receive between 7.5 and 9.5% of the vote. The Left Party, composed of former communists and left-wing socialists, would receive, according to these same opinion polls, between 8.7 and 11.3% of the vote. The People's Party Liberals would receive between 5.1 and 6.8% of the vote. The Parliament's smallest party, the Christian Democrats, would receive, according to these polls, between 4.6 and 6.7% of the vote. It is unlikely that any other parties will enter the Parliament. The Feminist Initiative has, according to the recent opinion polls, no more than 1.7% support in the Parliament, while the others have had at most 1.9%. Between August 28th and 30th, 2018, the Feminist Initiative and others would receive only a total of 3.3% of the vote. Sweden does have a modified form of proportional representation. The elections are basically proportional. In other words, the parties' percentages of the valid votes and their percentages of the parliamentarians are approximately equal, for those parties that manage to get either at least 4% of the national parliamentary election vote or at least 12% of the valid votes in any of Sweden's various electoral districts. In such cases, the parties receive a minimum of 14 seats out of 349. 310 seats are so-called fixed constituency or electoral district seats, while the remaining 39 seats are elected from the entire Sweden to correct partially the discrepancies between the percentages of the party's popular vote and popular vote shares and their shares of the seats in the constituencies. In Sweden, the monarch at this point, King Carl or Charles XVI Gustaf, is a mere figurehead as the head of state and does not even formally invite anyone to form a new government. Instead, the Riksdags or Parliament's speaker or chairperson does that. And should no party obtain even a clear plurality of the seats, Sweden is likely to experience a period of political instability. Theoretically, it would be possible under such a case that some of the traditional parties, such as the Social Democrats, moderates, centrists, and possibly even the Left Party or Liberals or Christian Democrats, would team up and have either a formal coalition government or at least an agreement on supporting the minority government on questions of confidence and the budget until such a time when the Sweden Democrats' threat of toppling the traditional political order would have subsided and possibly new elections would have been held. Because of the budget crisis of late 2014, there was talk already of a snap parliamentary election, but that was then postponed. Because the Social Democrats, Greens, moderates, centrists, liberals, and Christian Democrats made an agreement outlining a series of conditions in order to ensure political stability until at least 2022. The agreement included two important parts. The candidate for prime minister who gathered the most support would be elected, and this would apply both to the incumbent prime minister Stefan Löfven, who is also the Swedish Social Democratic Party's leader, and new candidates for prime minister. A government in minority would be allowed to have its budget passed by the abstention of opposition parties who had signed the agreement. The summer of 2018, which now has officially ended, has seen a rise in violent crime in Sweden, and several incidents, including the arson or deliberate burning of over 100 cars on August 15th, have caused many Swedes to say that law and order is the key issue in the upcoming election. While Sweden has faced sporadic gang violence in recent years at the end of the summer break for students in early August, violence in Gothenburg, in western Sweden, Falkenberg, and Trollhättan was said to be on a large scale. Prime Minister Löfven referred to the August violence as if it was organized almost like a military operation, and I would assume that at least some of the mainstream political parties will try to find links between, for example, these young criminals and the Sweden Democrats, because a part of their strategy of fighting against the Sweden Democrats has been to brand the party as a party of right-wing extremists and criminals who have no place in the Swedish democratic political mainstream. And there seems to be a so-called cordon sanitaire, or sanitary hallway, or cordon formed by the mainstream political parties to exclude the Sweden Democrats from power. Of course, if the Sweden Democrats managed to become the biggest party, which is not totally out of question given some of the recent opinion polls, then theoretically the Swedish parliament speaker would have to probably give to their leader the right to try to form a new government. But in case the mainstream political parties, mainly all the other political parties in the parliament, were firm in refusing their support to a possible Sweden democratic minority government, then it would only survive until the introduction of its first budget, because on the budget laws it would be then voted down. But this might well result in snap parliamentary elections, and the Sweden Democrats could claim that their mandate from the ordinary patriotic and nationalist Swedes would have been nullified by these out-of-touch mainstream and privileged and elitist and too liberal mainstream political parties. 2 young men aged 16 and 20 were later arrested on suspicion of arson, while a third one in his 20s was arrested as he tried to flee to Turkey. The current party leaders are the following. The Social Democrats have Prime Minister Mr. Stefan Löfven. The Moderates have Mr. Ulf Kristersson. The Sweden Democrats have Mr. Jimmy Åkesson. The Greens have a joint leadership between Mr. Gustav Fridolin and Ms. Isabella Lövin. The centrists have Ms. Annie Lööf. The left has Mr. Jonas Sjöstedt. The liberals have Mr. Jan Björklund. And the Christian Democrats have Ms. Ebba Busch Thor. Sweden traditionally has been a consensual democracy with a great deal of compromises and negotiations, and a desire to avoid nasty political rhetoric and debate, and conclude so-called gentlemen's, or should I say gentle people's, to be gender neutral, agreements between the mainstream political parties. Minority governments have been common in Sweden ever since the 1970s, especially. In such cases, the governments have had to negotiate with one or more opposition parties to arrive at compromises which enough opposition legislators have been able to live with without risking the fall of a government and a period of political uncertainty and instability and possibly fresh elections.